Greetings, Dr. Richardson.
Greetings. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Doing great.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight on Afrofutures Pod. I like to read your wonderful biography for listeners, and so they get a chance to know all the wonderful things that you've been doing before we get into the full talk.
Okay, cool.
Dr. Flourice W. Richardson is an assistant professor and director of technical and professional writing at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, NC A&T. She holds an MA in English and African American Literature from North Carolina A&T and master's certification in technical and professional communication from East Carolina University, and a Ph.D. in English Studies with a certification in Women's and Gender Studies from Illinois State University. She is a 2012 Scholars for the Dream recipient from the CCCCs and a Bedford St. Martin's Fellow from CPTSC. Her chapter, The Eugenics Agenda, Deliberative, Rhetoric, and Therapeutic Discourse of Hate, published in Communication, Ethnicity, and Identity in Technical Communication, examines how rhetoric and eugenics reinforce dehumanization. This exploration continues in her chapter, Exploring Afrofuturism as a Tool to Dismantle Hegemony in Octavia Butler's The Evening and the Morning and the Night. In Dr. DuEwa Frazier's Introduction to Afrofuturism, a mixtape in Black literature and arts, focusing on resistance and reclamation in speculative fiction. Dr. Richardson is also collaborating with Dr. Pamela Ayebo T. Hoff and others on Mothering Blackness, an Alchemy of Resistance, an autoethnographic study of organizing culturally centered events at predominantly white institutions. Her research examines intersections of artificial intelligence, race, and technical communication, aiming to expand perspectives on power, race, and gender in the field. She also has a forthcoming chapter, From Aunt Jemima to Auntie, Black Feminist Pedagogy's Role in Transforming TPC Education, that will appear in the Routledge Handbook on Technical and Professional Communication. And please, let's give a warm online digital Black feminism welcome to Dr. Flourice W. Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you. You know what? Hearing all that read, I was like, okay, yeah, okay. That's
Oh, yeah, I did do that. Okay.
did do that. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So thank you so much for those updates. And Dr. Richardson, this is your floor. And let me introduce the book. We're discussing Introduction to Afrofuturism, a mixtape in Black literature and arts, in which I'm the editor of this wonderful volume. And it features your chapter titled Exploring Afrofuturism as a Tool to Dismantle. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it hegemony?
Yes.
Hegemony.
Yeah.
Hegemony in Octavia Butler's The Evening and the Morning and the Night.
Yes. You know, that is a mouthful. Now,
It really is.
At some point in time, I'm going to start having these like 4-word titles when I can get like big time or whatever.
But are there any scholars who actually do that? Because I always see some long titles, you know.
Maybe Bell Hooks or Toni Morrison, but I can't touch that. I can't.
Sure.
I can't touch
We
that.
tend to, as they say, add the hot sauce and stir.
There you go. There you go. There you go. You know what? Thank you so much for sending out the invitations to participate in this project. I'm really excited about this chapter. And sometimes it's like you'll write stuff and you just think to yourself, wow. Because I had to go back and read it. And I was like, did I write that? And I was like, yes, Flourice, you wrote that.
Well, wait a minute. Now, hold up now. It's too late to take it back now, Dr. Richardson. Did you write it?
Yes, I did. I did write it.
And you know what? And I know you did. There's no question. And you did just like we all did. You did all your due diligence on your
Yes,
research. And we did as it goes through the editing process. And I know that you went through that. So there's not a question. It's a genius and beautifully written chapter.
thank you. I mean, it was born out of, I mean, really, it started in 2014, really.
Wow.
It's like
So this is like
nobody,
10 years later. This is like
yes, 10
decades
years
later.
later. Yes, 10 years later. And
Wow.
this chapter was actually born out of my doctoral work when I was at Illinois State University.
But you
You
know what?
know,
It did say that in your well, no, it didn't say it in the bio, but you did get your PhD there.
yes.
Okay.
You know, and here's the thing. I do have a master's in literature. I did teach
Mm-hmm.
African American literature for a long time. But you know, it's like when I started teaching, there wasn't really a big focus on Afrofuturism, much
Right.
less really speculative fiction. Of course, we read it, but it's
Right.
like, no, there wasn't a huge emphasis on speculative fiction. And so, really, I got exposed to Black speculative fiction when I was working on my doctorate. When I was taking a class with the brilliant, the wonderful scholar, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Daryl E. Harris at
Oh
Illinois
yes,
State.
Dorian Harris. That's right.
Yes, Daryl was teaching a class in feminist literature. And so my course schedule was full, but I was like, oh no, I've got to take a class with Dr. Harris.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's like, I was like, yeah, I got to take this class. And really, I was exposed to Black speculative. That's where I was exposed to Black speculative fiction, and really
Mm-hmm.
got a lot more clarity about the about Black feminist thought, and just looking at different issues and the examination and interrogation
Mm-hmm.
of those of different topics. And so, and she actually, this was a part of my comprehensive exam. So I had to talk about Octavia Butler for my comprehensive exam also. So
Mm.
yeah, and so this has been like, yeah, 10 years of looking at this work and making sure, just going back and interrogating it, and then had the opportunity to teach a Black speculative fiction class at Winston-Salem State. And
Mm-hmm.
so really gave me the opportunity to really think through a lot of different things. This particular work, again, I was working on my dissertation, and a lot of my dissertation was it talks about, uses Black feminist thought as a lens, but it
Mm-hmm.
also looking at women and how women use their voices to gain agency, right?
Oh, I love
In
that.
the face of oppression. And
And
so
please tell us, Dr. Richardson, for those who may not be familiar with the terms in scholarship, what do you mean by agency?
agency, I mean control,
Okay.
having the ability to have the rights over your own body,
Mm.
right? And really, that's a big question now, who has the right to control the body? And so, when I mean agency, I mean the thinking in terms of the surveillance and the police,
Sure.
and the control and things of that sort. So, who controls the body? Do you control your body? We'd
Mm-hmm.
like to think we all control our bodies, but in some ways, when we start start how we are so policed, it's sometimes difficult to see where you're just in total control.
Sure. And do you
This
feel that Octavia Butler's work really spoke to you as far as that topic?
Yes, it did. I mean, definitely, because my work was looking at eugenics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so eugenics is where it's like that survival of the fittest mentality and looking at who is deviant or who's fit to live and who's not. And so we had started reading Bloodchild, and the evening and the morning and the night was the second, the list of stories. And it really did speak to me because it's
Mm-hmm.
like she was exploring all of these different themes, and really it was about control of the body, or the
Mm-hmm.
body, and really like being in these other worlds in some ways. Now, this isn't necessarily an other world. Maybe it's a, fictional world, but it's like it spoke to me so much because of the setting of the story. The
Mm.
setting of the story is in California.
Wow.
For people who don't know about eugenics, in this country, we had a eugenics agenda that was pushed through the Human Betterment League. And California, Pasadena, California in particular, had one of the largest and the most efficient uh, propaganda campaign for eugenics. And this is thinking like the 1910s, up to the 1950s, and 50s and 60s. And it's like when I started reading it, and I was like, wait a minute, this is looking at who's fit to live and who's not. And
Mm.
so I'm like, it was definitely a continuation because it continues to talk about in terms of eugenics and the marking of bodies, really.
Mm.
So it's like which bodies based on the physical are
Right.
fit to live, because especially when you start thinking about eugenics, when that was all really that was the criteria.
Mhm.
If you were not white, male, heterosexual, a Christian, you could be considered unfit.
Mhm.
They had the fittest family campaign. And so
Oh,
it's like,
wow.
yes, this story spoke to me. And I'm a rhetorician. I don't really do a lot of fiction writing, so most of my stuff is nonfiction. So it really did speak to me. Octavia Butler is brilliant, yeah, and I know she's like the grande dame of Black speculative fiction.
Exactly. When it comes to, she's the queen. She's the queen mother. Exactly.
And so
And
when I
Mhm.
can't coming across this work, reading her work, it definitely spoke to me. And I was like, this is what I got to write about. Reading it, the creation of the disease, in order so you can talk about the dis-ease
Mm.
of people who are being oppressed and how DNA, especially when we start talking about like Darwinism and this this myth of science being truth,
Mhm.
and really science is science, right? It's not that it's a truth, right? It depends on who is examining it and who is
Mm.
reading it or who is interpreting it. That really makes it, is it science? So it's
Sure.
questionable, especially when they were using like phenotypes or how your head was shaped to decide if you were going to be a criminal or not.
Wow, that's
Really.
absolutely crazy. Just all of those things just
Mm.
that happened in the past.
Yes. And I think the beautiful thing about Afrofuturism is that you can look at the past, that alternative history,
Mhm.
and you can use that to help you to understand what's happening in the present so you can get yourself ready for the future. I
Wow.
think this is a story really, the evening and the morning and the night. I would just really suggest uh, the read
Yeah.
outside of just this work because
Mhm.
I don't really give like a summary of what's going on in the story. I would
Mhm.
definitely encourage you the reading of it, but it's like breaking it down so people understand, you know what, this is what this is saying to me. This is what
Mhm.
this is saying to me. This is what is pointing out to me. This is what I'm seeing. And really, I start the
Your chapter?
with asking a question. What is it
Yeah.
like to exist in a realm where an intricate tapestry of science governs every facet of your life, or in a society where your DNA becomes the ominous mark of subjectivity and isolation.
Mm.
So it's like, hey, what is it like? Really? And she gives us a vision of what it's like to be marked. And that marking or that marginalization, really, it's harsh. And so it has a harsh reality.
Mm-hmm.
oppressed bodies. And so let's see, I think I'll go ahead and read unless you have another question going into it.
Sure. I appreciate that because I thought about the statement that you have here, and you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about this a few minutes ago, just in terms of really connecting the idea between, Octavia Butler's work and your own inspiration for the research. Throughout history, oppressive hegemonic institutions have employed DNA as a weapon to rationalize enslavement, incarceration, coerced sterilization, effectively branding historically marginalized bodies as deviant. And you spoke
Yes.
on that. And now, here, as the chapter begins, it really unfolds the harsh reality of that this is not coming from the fictionalized story, as you mentioned.
No.
This is true fact. And, from the
Yes.
research, this is can be uncovered historically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It can be really, it's a part of our history that sometimes we want to forget, but we can't. We should not forget. I mean, I wrote a chapter, it was called The Eugenics Agenda,
Mhm.
Deliberative Rhetoric and Therapeutic Discourse of Hate. And really, that chapter that appeared in the technical writing textbook was really talking about how we use rhetoric and how we use propaganda in
Mhm.
order to push this idea that certain bodies, mostly marginalized bodies, should their DNA, it should be used as a weapon. So it has been used, and we understand historically, it's been used to rationalize enslavement, of course. We know that history, incarceration in California. Well, if they're not still doing this, if you're in prison or you're in a ward, you can be sterilized. We have a history. We had the Human Betterment League was all over. It was in 33 states. And literally, they would go in through the Human Betterment League. They would
Mhm.
go in and they would convince young Black women, Indigenous women, Black and Brown folk that you need to be sterilized. However, some folk they didn't give their consent.
Mhm.
And so it's like, but to justify the sterilization, they had these big campaigns and they had all this stuff that they talked about as far as if you are you wouldn't have a moron to run a train, to run a bank. It's like
Mm.
it's almost like they put out little
A whole
cartoon
campaign.
pamphlets, a lot of things that we understand with our history is that it's not completely pretty, it's not completely nice.
True.
Bodies were used to justify, bodies were used to create identities, bodies were used to define how we deal with each other. So again, when we start talking about like this, looking at different issues, definitely using the work to provoke questions or to
Mhm.
our understanding of race, class, and gender. This is definitely a work that that speaks to that.
Truly, truly. And I love to hear more on your chapter. Again, we're talking about exploring Afrofuturism as a tool to dismantle hegemony in Octavia Butler's The Evening and the Morning and the Night. And so feel free, Dr. Richardson, if you have an excerpt you want to read, and then, we could discuss it, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll read some of the second section, the rhetorical construction of disease and dis-ease. Is initially, I believe that delving into speculative fiction by African American authors like Butler provided advantageous platform because it allowed for an exploration that is free from the discomfort or confronting present day issues related to race, gender, class, ability, and sexuality. However, upon conducting a more thorough examination of this body of work, I have come to the realization that Butler's intent was not to provide the audience with a comfortable space. Rather, she deliberately sought to instill discomfort or dis-ease in order to provoke action and challenge readers to confront systems of oppression and the systematic control or the systemic control of deviant bodies. Rhetorically speaking, she juxtaposes the creation of disease and the construction of self agency to interrogate rhetoric connected to body autonomy and agency. Butler ponders how much of what we do is encouraged, discouraged, or otherwise guided by what we are genetically, and how much is actually controlled by others. In this case, what if the genetic disease, Derriga, existed, or DGD? How would those infected with the disease be treated by those who are considered normal? Or how would their diseased bodies be marked visually? The visual description and the construction of this disease causes discomfort for her audience as she weaves together the visual and the genetic markers of three devastating diseases: Huntington's, and I'm just going to say PKU, and but let's now, okay? Huntington disease is a devastating neurodegenerative condition resulting in a progressive loss of motor, cognitive, and behavior and functions that may extend over a decade. Symptoms usually become visible between the ages of 30 and 40 years old. This late onset of the disease can be life-shattering for victims and their caregivers. The PKU is a metabolic disorder that, without treatment, individuals can cause severe brain damage. The reason Butler selected PKU is one of the components of the DJD is because it causes severe mental impairment that is only controlled by dietary restrictions. However, some scientists have suggested that PKU is connected to the human papilloma virus and cervical cancer, which would suggest that the cause of disease may stem from sexual contact with someone with the disease. Now, the reason why I pull out these diseases is because in the story, she has the protagonist, and her name is Lynn Lattimore. And she doesn't have this. Her parents, she has it, but she got it from her parents. And she got it from her parents because they were a part of this treatment where it's like if you had cancer, then they had this magic pill that they were peddling to people. And if you took that medicine and you were cured of the cancer, right, your offsprings would end up with this Derriga or this DJD disease. And so the third condition is where it's like you begin to self-mutilate. And that's one of the things that happens in this story. Lynn's parents, because they both have the DJD, the father ends up killing the mother because of the disease. He's self-mutilating. So it's like this aggressive, and it's where he attacks her and then he kills. It's like he kills himself by it's self-mutilation, right?
So would you also say there's a component of mental illness with this as well?
Definitely, definitely. And that's a part of it. So and mind you, this is a disease that she created. And so it's like at the time, probably it's like there's this, we saw in these news, whatever, where it was like, I guess it was a big influx of HIV and different things. And it's like all these cures, but people are trying to figure out a magic, really, the rhetoric, this cure. So it's a cure all. So the medicines are almost a cure all. And so in this story, it's like this cure all was actually caused something worse than the original disease. And so really when we start breaking that down, well, how does that connect really? So going back still, it's like, okay, so there's a mental illness that's a part of the disease. There's this self-mutilation that's a part of the disease. And there is the violent attacks that's also a part of this disease. And so it's like the only way to really kind of control some of it is by dietary restrictions. And also in the story, what happens is that they have to wear markers. So they have to wear markers of their deviance, right? And the food
Is that the same as where markers of that they are carrying the disease?
yes, this is a
Okay.
marker that they're carrying the disease. One, because it's like really when you it's a marker that's supposed to be almost for their own protection, right? Because it's like they have special programs and things set up for them, special wards. And it's like you could be fine for a little while, but again, the older you get, the worse it gets. And the more that you're likely to end up in a DJD ward. And in the story, the ward is a place where it's like they just throw you away, they isolate you.
Does this to you as you were, I'm not sure if you, because I know you said you started your research 2014, but does
Mhm.
this mimic to you in any way? And if I'm wrong, tell me the pandemic or what some people might have experienced during pandemic or COVID, like the early parts of it, when people didn't really know what it was and what was going on, and you had to be like isolated or quarantined and things like that.
Yes, in a way, but with the isolation, as far as like with COVID, that was where you could self isolate, and
Yeah.
really with this, it's like it's a forced isolation. They really it was more or less like we don't really want you around us. It's so and your body being seen is a problem, and so I would probably say probably the coming out after
After.
COVID, because I don't know, like in North Carolina, I'm in North Carolina. So it's like the wearing of the masks and things of that sort.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have, it's
Because
like,
different
let's,
people didn't agree maybe to continue that, and some people
mhm.
did want to do it.
Yeah, and so
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
that back and forth thing, which really I'm neither there, I was neither for it or I knew what I was gonna do was just
Right.
put my mask on. But I'm like, hey, if you don't want to, hey, it's cool. But that's not, yeah, it's not the same because it's like, no, we need you to we need you to self-identify and let us
Hmm.
know that you have this condition. And they put them in, well, I would say this when we start looking, when I could equate this condition, I think in terms of how people are, I guess, still the marking of bodies, right? But it's
Hmm.
like they were given scholarships if they were DGD, right? They were given, not special privileges because it wasn't a privilege. You lived in a house with other people with DGD,
Yeah.
you were still isolated. So it wasn't necessarily a privilege. So the isolation, really, I would probably think that it would do more harm, but it's like, no. And in the end, in this story, it's like her body was more like, or this woman's body was seen more as like the savior, I
Mm.
would say.
Like
Because,
is she the savior of people with DGD?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Now, when you go through and you read the story, you learn that Lynn, because she is unique, she has two parents with the
Mm.
condition where
With the
most people,
condition. Yeah.
yeah, most people just had one, right?
One.
But
Mhm.
she had two parents. And because she had two parents, when the other people with DGD were around her, they would actually calm down. Their symptoms would just, it's almost like her. When they
Yeah.
were away from her, then it was a problem, right? So it's like her body, it's like she used her body as almost like a tool, or it was like a tool to
Yeah.
save other people. Even when she got in a relationship with another person with DGD, and she used her body as a tool to save him from the madness that was coming. And so her body, or
It's almost like
pheromones,
using herself as a scientific, I don't know what you call it. Like, you said a tool, definitely.
she is the cure.
The cure. Mm.
She's, I mean, really, she's not necessarily, well, I won't say the cure,
What a
but she is
metaphor for Black women, right? For like
definitely.
the cure, the solution, the problem solver, the everything.
Yes, yes. And she is. She is the everything.
Dr. Richardson, I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned about the special diet. On 190 of your chapter, where you
Mhm,
say Butler addresses hegemonic preoccupations with normalcy, and in the story equates the food that DGD victims must eat or consume to
mhm,
dog biscuits. So,
mhm.
can you talk a little bit about that? Why that was within this hegemonic preoccupation with normalcy and things like that?
Well, really, it's like a preoccupation with our food, or the food that we eat, or
Mhm.
the things that we digest, or the things that really, it's like this dog biscuit. It's just another means of control. This is something that they came up with to say this is what you should consume in order for you to stay normal. So you have this dog biscuit. And really, the dog biscuit is a dehumanizing, it's dehumanizing to even consider it to be a dog biscuit. That's not human. That's not
For that to be a dog biscuit, and it's not for humans, it would be for a dog.
exactly. It's not for human. It's not really for human consumption.
Mm.
However, for these folk, they have to eat it. So it's like for these folk, they have to consume this. And so this is something again that they have been given, and they're saying, hey, you got to take this. You got to eat this for you get what I'm saying? So it's like
Yeah.
it's not just this,
It's not to help them, it's to be further dehumanizing.
it further dehumanizes them. So it gives them some nutrition, but it further dehumanizes them. And it is as another stigma. When you're out in public and you're trying to eat, and this is all that you can eat, again, that's isolating. Really makes visual that it makes visual excuse me, the disease.
Yeah.
It makes visual the fact that you are not considered normal. So
Yeah.
it really is, wow. It's the whole thing is about really the dehumanization. So, and really when I start thinking about again this Lynn Lattimore, it's at the beginning of the story, she sees herself as a victim, but towards the end, she's not the victim. She is again the hero, or she's the one and not just her, but there's another character. Her name is Beatrice. And she has the same situation where her pheromones, or just being around other people with DGD, actually
Mhm.
helps calm everyone else down. So
Mm.
there's a whole nother, and they call it a resort. They call it a resort instead of calling it the hospital or a ward or anything like that, because it's a place where the people with DGD can live together and they can actually create. And it's not just about being marked as deviant. So this whole thing about um, the agency and the body, um, I mean, really, it helps the audience to kind of look at some of the strategies, really, that like governments use to strip people, groups, uh,
Sure.
politically, of human rights and the reproductive rights, or right to just, to be born. The beginning again of the story, really, she's a victim, but in the end, she's no victim. She
Mhm.
is
And
again. the hero.
So, thinking about, you have another very intriguing detail in your chapter that talks about Octavia Butler using DGD not only to address sexuality and gender, but also class and race. Can you talk a bit about your findings with that? So now it's not just race, but it's also sexuality, gender, and class. How does all of
Yes.
those converge?
Okay, so in the story, okay, if you're poor, if you are lower income, you're going to end up in the ward or you're going to end up dead. One or the other, in the ward or dead. Which, when you start thinking about class, if you can't afford this, what is it called, the DGD, and have to, this retreat or this place that's secret. Now, this is a secret place. The ward, everyone knows about the ward. But when you start talking about let's see, hold on, let me see if I can find it. When you start talking about this place where where people with money can go. So
Mm,
when you have money, it's just, I mean, really, when you have the funds, you don't have to worry about insurance, right? But when you don't, then you have to take what you can get as far as healthcare is concerned.
mhm.
Same thing is happening here. The people with affluence, they're able to go to the Delge. And that's the name of I would say, the hidden estate where
Okay.
these patients can go. And again, it's hidden. And it's a place where it's not for everybody. So it's
Yeah.
like you can't use your SSI or your whatever to go to this place.
To get in there. And I
It's
see you
it's
say
it
on
Mhm.
page 194, just to draw back for our listeners who want to read your chapter, on page 194, you state, Dr. Richardson, the fictional Dilge served a twofold purpose: for isolation and for safety.
Yes.
So it's very
Yes.
interesting. You're saying, wow, very people who are afflicted who would need that kind of care, that kind of shelter, were not afforded to go there.
No. And in order for you to go there, if you didn't have that kind of money, you had to get a scholarship or you had to be recommended. It was not something that it was known by everybody. So it's
Mm,
like that's certainly a class issue when we start talking about
yeah.
who can and who can't.
Elitism, and it sounds like too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And really, the only reason that Lynn in this story knew about it was because of her boyfriend, Alan. His mother was there, and her family was able to get her into this place because they pulled some strings or they got some assistance in getting her into this place. But unfortunately, it was kind of late for her because she had already gone through the self mutilization and the isolation, being in the ward. But it's like having to go the extra mile, I would say, to get
Mhm,
their daughter into this place. I
mhm,
mean, a place that would be really helpful for, I mean, really, everyone should have this kind of treatment. But unfortunately, everybody is not going to have that type of treatment. And
mhm.
we know that now. I said, at the
Yeah.
village, DGD patients are encouraged to follow routines that enable them to function past their disability. Butler
Mm,
it's a place where patients are painting and assembling machinery, sculpting, and composing music. And so this is a place, again, because they have Beatrice, who is like I guess, like the keeper or the manager of this place. And she is like Lynn, where she had the two parents. So she throws off these pheromones. She's
mhm,
able to help control or to help keep the patients under control so that they do have this routine.
I see. And this is who you say disrupts, quote, disrupts the audience's perception of disability
Yeah.
in your chapter. I find that's a very powerful statement.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we look at people who are different, who are differently abled, as if
Hmm.
they are ugly. And I mean, seriously, as if if you don't want, they don't want you to be seen. You don't want to see them.
Yeah.
Or you want to assume that they are, perceive them a certain way. But why?
And you're saying that Octavia Butler really shines a light on that in this particular story that you have so well unpacked. And in terms of conclusions with Afrofuturism and your research for this work, what would you say would be, I guess, some thoughts that you would want to leave the reader with, what you want them to realize about the research and about this framework taken from Octavia Butler's work?
Really, I'd want them to interrogate their agency. I would really want them to look at what's going on around them. I would want them to watch the news. I would want
Mhm.
them to know, I mean, really to look at how we treat each other. I would want them, I really would use it as, I really want them to see it as a call to action.
Teaching, a good point, a teaching tool as well.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely a great teaching tool. And I guess really that's the beautiful thing again about speculative fiction and Afrofuturism, is that you can use this work. You can use this work to imagine and to think about different futures, about really, and to interrogate where we are right now so we know where we're going. That
That's right.
when I read, I mean, really, it's like this stuff makes you think. And really, this work in particular opened me up to make me think about a lot of different things, especially when we start thinking about agency and the body, the government controlling bodies, reproductive rights, those things, and making those things really discussions to make this visible. Reclaiming agency and visibility is important, and especially when we start thinking about Black and Brown people. I just say Black people, right? And so I would want people to take away from this that because the story, at the end of the story, we don't know what what Lynn decides to do, because she's given an option. Beatrice is trying to get her to come and take her place, or to open another spot for
Hmm.
people with this condition. And she leaves us hanging. So we don't know what Lynn decides to do.
What she decides.
Yeah, we don't get, she doesn't give us that. She does not force the ending.
Right.
So it gives us the opportunity to create endings.
And I love toward the end of your chapter, I
Love,
appreciate that, Dr. Richardson, because you say this is Butler's attempt to reclaim agency and visibility for those bodies that have been marked as deviant in a world that would rather that they remain invisible. Their lives have been studied and researched, but their reality was yet to be written in their own voices. And I find that you writing and researching, publishing this chapter, it continues Octavia Butler's legacy and still allows us to look at your research from a true lens of Black feminist thought and pushing it further so
yeah.
that we can still reconnect, even though her work was, the work may have been many years ago. As you
Mhm.
mentioned, it's still very much relevant in today's world, whether in research in the fictional Black speculative fiction world or in
Mhm.
today's world of what we all live in and are living through. So for that, I give my utmost thanks to you for your valuable contribution to this volume.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to contribute to this volume with all the other brilliant people that you have brought together for this work. And I'm just amazed and I'm happy and I'm excited, just thankful. Thank you.
So wonderful. And so, Dr. Richardson, please close us out with just giving where we could follow you or where people can mainly follow you online and reach out to you in regard to your work.
Okay, so you can follow me on Facebook, Flourice W. Flourice Richardson on Facebook. You can follow me on Instagram at authentically flowcentric. And that's really about it. If you definitely want to see more or read more work from me, those are the platforms to find. I'm not really that big online, but that's where you'll find a lot of my work where I'm announcing things. And that's really about it. After this, I think I want to do a podcast. I think this is great.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Dr. Richardson. I've enjoyed talking with you about your chapter in Introduction to Afrofuturism, and we look forward to keep in touch with you and find out all of more of what you're doing with your research and scholarship.
All right. Thank you. Have a
Thank
wonderful night.
thank you so much. You too.
All right.